Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be giving some book recommendations for if you love the Final Fantasy games. Obviously each Final Fantasy game is different in tone, in characters, in the arcs of the characters, the relationships, and the stories themselves. So this was a little tricky because I wanted to find ones that would be specific to certain Final Fantasy games, but then also capture the feeling that so many of the Final Fantasy games have. So I'm going to start with a set of books that I feel a little bad having these be the first ones I mentioned because they are some of the most popular books within fantasy circles, but truly some of these, the parallels are just too good to not recommend them. So that would be the Cosmere books by Brandon Sanderson. Just like with Final Fantasy, a lot of the Cosmere books have different things to offer, and thus certain ones are going to be better suited for depending on which Final Fantasy is your favorite. If you're currently really enjoying Final Fantasy 16, then I would definitely check out the Store My Archive. The parallels between Clive's story and Caledon's are pretty notable. We follow two young men that clearly have experienced a lot of trauma at a young age, especially as a result of the actions of those in power. And then you are seeing them sort of fall and they're trying to claw their way back to something. And they have a lot to tackle within themselves, but then often they have to balance their own internal struggles with that of what is going on around them. And sometimes they have to put themselves second in order to protect those they love or to just protect their world and their society and their way of life. And so I think Caledon and Clive, beyond just their stories having some similarities, they themselves as characters are similar, as Clive seems like the kind of character that he is a little rough around the edges and seems rather harsh at first. He's clearly experienced a lot of fighting and a lot of death, but deep down there is this fierce protectiveness and even a sense of vulnerability to him. And I think Caledon is very similar. Both of these individuals are also tackling survivor's guilt. And so there's just so many things that if you are really enjoying the world of Final Fantasy 16, the politics, but especially Clive's story, then I think you're going to really like Caledon's story in the Store My Archive. After that, Warbreaker, to me, the tone of this one reminds me of Final Fantasy X in a lot of ways, and some of the politicking reminds me of Final Fantasy XII. I think this one captures more of that upbeat campiness, and some of the characters sometimes are almost cliche in their dialogue or in the feeling of them being bad guys and things like that. But there's just so much to this that is really enjoyable, and the tone is fun. This is probably the most fun of Sanderson's Cosmere works, with the exception of a newer book, Trust the Emerald Sea, but that is very different. But Warbreaker follows these two sisters, one who her whole life was groomed to fulfill a marriage alliance to another kingdom, and then the other one who has never had any political obligations and thus is very carefree and a little unknowledgeable when it comes to the affairs of the kingdom. But the father of these two young women just cannot send his favorite daughter to fulfill his marriage alliance, so he sends the clueless one. And then she is forced to try and navigate these courts, and her sister decides, I have to rescue her because she's so clueless. And then along the way, there's really fascinating magic. That's true of all of Sanderson's works, but especially in Warbreaker. I think the magic is so colorful and vivid. And I think it's that colorful, vivid nature to the story that makes me think of Final Fantasy X, and the dialogue and the relationships between the characters. And one of the characters, Lightsong, who is someone who is basically a god among men, but he doesn't believe in his own divinity, I think is the kind of character that you might encounter in a Final Fantasy game. So Warbreaker, tons of fun. If you like the campier side of Final Fantasy, certain Final Fantasy games, then Warbreaker is the one for you. And then if you like the moody, if you like Final Fantasy VII, all these characters that have deep, dark pasts and they're coming together to try and be the little guys that take the big guys down, and also just the desire to protect civilizations and the planet itself. And it almost feels like there's this looming sense of dread, like is the apocalypse coming sort of a feeling. Then Mistborn is really honestly the perfect fit. So if you're a big fan of the moodiness from 7 and some of the other ones, and all of those plot points that I described, the details for what you get with Final Fantasy VII, just copy paste. So much of that is true of Mistborn as well. And even some of the parallels between Mistborn's Vin, who is the main protagonist, and Cloud, where they have a quietness to them. They have very different backstories, but I do think that their backstories, how it's shaped them and how they behave as a result of their backstories, I think you're going to see some similarities in them both. And then learning to come out of their shell and having also a relationship between another character that sort of helps them be able to be more expressive. The other characters surrounding them are rooting for them. I just think that you're going to see the crew in Mistborn have a lot of parallels to the group of characters that you get in 7. After that, we have a couple of manga recommendations. So I mentioned that colorful nature of Warbreaker, that vividness, and then also the campiness. And nothing does the fun camp like Fullmetal Alchemist. Fullmetal Alchemist is amazing. I love it. Has so many different characters, which is true of a lot of Final Fantasy games, and you find yourself caring about so many of them. It's got that ensemble cast, and Fullmetal has an unbelievable amount of characters and amount of characters that you love. I've thought about doing a tier ranking in the past of characters from Fullmetal, and I'm like, they would just pretty much all go at the top because I love them all. It would be impossible for me to decide. It would take hours of deliberation. The characters in this are fantastic. The way that the magic is incorporated into the story is really phenomenal. But on top of that, the world itself is a little bit more modern than what you see in a lot of fantasy stories. And you have trains and transportation like trains that make it a lot easier for the characters to get from one place to the next. And it has more modern conveniences to it, similar to what you see in 12, in 10, in 7. So there's a lot to this one that I think if you like I said, that upbeat nature, but then also a more advanced civilization where they're actually utilizing technology, Fullmetal. I mean, I love Fullmetal anyway. I recommend Fullmetal any chance I get because it's amazing. And then also Witch Hat Atelier. I played so little of 9, but I know that 9 has this whimsical nature to it, that whimsical is such a great way to describe this story. And it seems so pretty, and the architecture is so stunning, and it really has, it's a feast for the eyes in this. The art is so gorgeous, and I think a lot of people, part of what we love about Final Fantasy is just how pretty everything is, but there's always something sinister lurking beneath it. And in this story, for a little while, it's going to feel cute and nice. We follow a young girl, Coco, who wants to learn more about magic, and it seems like it's just going to stay in its lane of cute and nice and cozy, and then you start to see a lot of darker things. A lot of the themes are quite heavy, and how they're dissected is fantastic, and I don't see too many other stories that hit that really fantastic, that certain tone that has those deeper, more serious things while also having that charm and whimsy. I don't see too many things do that like Final Fantasy, and I think both, honestly, Witch Hat Atelier and Fullmetal accomplish that fantastically. One that is a book that I actually didn't personally connect with a lot, but it is a staple for a lot of people in fantasy, and also the magic and how it affects people is so similar to 16 that I had to mention it, and that would be the Broken Earth trilogy. And also just progressing through 16's plot and seeing what they think is causing the blight and how magic affects magic users. I mean, it's almost uncanny how similar it is to Broken Earth. So I actually don't want to say too much about the 5th season as the first one, because I think if I say too much, then you're going to know. But it might be more exciting if you go into it and then you discover those parallels for yourself. Very, very similar. Next up, we have one that's actually rooted in a different video game world. It's rooted in League of Legends, and that would be Ruination. The reason I'm recommending it, though, is it's just got that RPG feeling to it. It's a standalone story, so it's just one and done, and you follow a character named Callista, who is a very powerful soldier, and she is family to the person who is currently ruling Viego, and Viego has had something occur that he now wants to find a cure for. It's affecting his wife, who he loves very dearly, and everybody has assumed that without his wife, he will fail to be a good ruler, and so you are seeing our main character, Callista, go on what seems to be an impossible mission to find a cure for what is affecting Viego's wife, and just her navigating the world, discovering these mysterious this mysterious place, discovering if it's even real, and where she goes and what she discovers along the way. I just think not too many books capture that so vividly, even though it's not a visual medium, the way that Ruination did. And it had such a great balance of the characters being what moved the story forward and the plot being what moved the story forward. And I think Final Fantasy does that very well also. Last for today, we have the Bone Shard Daughter. This is the Drowning Empire trilogy, and I'm recommending this one because I think Final Fantasy does a great job. Actually, I have one more besides that to recommend, and it's true of this one as well. So the other one is Engines of Empire. I always say that this is basically if you combined Game of Thrones with Final Fantasy 12, so I had to bring it into this list because I'm always comparing it to 12 anyway. There's airships, and there's this kind of push and pull between the old and the new, the magic versus technology versus religion. You have these different guilds that are all vying for power, and you have some that are allying with others and then betraying others, and then also you have some characters going out into the world and discovering magic being used in different ways in other places and forbidden magic, and there's just so much to it that feels like a Final Fantasy game if it was much bleaker. And so it's almost like, because Final Fantasy 16 has been compared to Game of Thrones, it's like if you combine 16 and 12 together, you would get Engines of Empire. Very good. And then what I was saying, I kind of went off on a tangent there for a sec, but what I was saying about this one that is true of Engines of Empire as well is there's a blend a little bit of both fantasy and science fiction. So that sci-fantasy feel you get, I think, is very common in Final Fantasy games, and it's present in these two books as well. This one, especially the first book in particular, has not only a feeling of sci-fantasy, but a little bit of horror as well. We follow a young woman whose father is the Emperor, and he uses bone shard magic, which is where pieces of bones that have been taken from living citizens are used to create these things called constructs, which make up his spies and soldiers and things like that serve him because he commands these codes into the bones. But when he creates these constructs, any bone that has been taken from a person that is now being used makes that person sick. And so the country does not really love this magic system as you would expect. And Lynn is discovering more about the politics, but also she's trying to learn this magic from her father and figure out how she's going to fill his shoes, while also trying to navigate the fact that she is missing a lot of her memories and she's trying to gain them back. And then within that, you also get some other perspectives that show you a little bit more of the world. And there's also some animal companions in this, some mythological creature companions that I think that it's so like some of the mythological creatures that you see in Final Fantasy games, where they're really cute and they're just such a fun addition to the story. They kind of bring new life to it. So Bone Shard, the trilogy itself is called Drowning Empire. Highly recommend. But anyway, that's it for a list of books and manga to check out if you are a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise. I've done a similar style video for if you love The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt, and also the lore, if you love the lore from Elden Ring, some book recommendations for that. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope that if you check out any of these books that you really, really enjoy them, and if you yourself are a big reader, feel free to leave your recommendations in the comments down below. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.